My dad threw a retirement party and told me to leave in front of everyone, but before I could stand up, my husband did. And what he said, it changed everything. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. You won't believe what happened at my father's retirement dinner. I know that sounds like the beginning of a bad joke, or maybe one of those over-the-top drama stories people exaggerate for the internet. But I swear to you, every word I'm about to tell is real. The drama didn't begin that night. It started much earlier. But that night, that was the explosion, and what hurt the most. I wasn't even invited. Let that sink in for a moment. My father, my own flesh and blood, was celebrating the biggest night of his professional life. After 35 years in the legal field, he was finally retiring. Fancy suits, champagne toasts, speeches, the whole 9 yards, but his only daughter didn't get so much as a phone call, not an email, not a text, not even a second-hand invite, the way I found out from a Facebook post shared by my cousin. It was just a picture of the menu with the caption, "Uncle Richard's big night, so proud." I sat there staring at my phone for a good 5 minutes. Not because I was shocked he left me out, he'd been cutting me off in subtle ways for years, but because somewhere deep down, a tiny part of me still hoped I mattered. And clearly, I didn't. I showed the post to my husband, Daniel. He looked at it, sighed heavily, and said, "Are you seriously thinking of going?" I didn't answer right away, because yes, I was thinking about it. Not to confront anyone, not to create a scene, but because I still loved him, even after everything. Even after the years of silence, the distance he put between us after he remarried, the way he treated me like a reminder of a life he wanted to forget. I still loved my father. I just wanted to be in the room. Even if I had to stand in the back. Even if no one spoke to me. Daniel wasn't thrilled. He made it clear years ago where you stand, he said gently. Why walk back into a room where you're already invisible? But he knows me. And he knew once my mind was made up, there was no turning back. That night I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. Not because I was nervous about how I looked, but because I needed to feel strong. I picked out my best navy blue dress. The one that always made me feel like myself. Not flashy, not loud, just confident. As I slipped on my heels, I caught Daniel watching me. He didn't say anything. He just walked over, kissed my forehead, and whispered, "I've got your back." That was all I needed. We arrived at the restaurant around 7:30 p.m. It was one of those high-end places downtown, with valet parking and waiters who barely smile. The second we walked through the double doors, I felt it. The chill, the shift in energy, the silence, conversations slowed. Eyes turned. My father was already seated at the head of a long, beautifully decorated table. His new wife, Trisha, sat beside him in a glittering gown, holding a champagne flute and laughing at something a man in a suit had just said. Then he saw me, and his entire face dropped. He didn't hide it. He didn't fake a smile. He didn't even nod. Just that same cold stare he'd given me when I told him I wasn't going to take his side in the divorce, but I refused to shrink. I smiled politely and took a seat at an empty table near the back, far enough to be out of the way, but still within view of the main event. Nobody came over. Nobody acknowledged me. Some pretended not to recognize me at all, but I stayed. Because that night wasn't just about him. It was about me reclaiming my space. Even if it was uncomfortable. Then came the moment, the speeches. Trisha stood up first, offering a sweet, overly rehearsed toast. She spoke about his dedication, his wisdom, and how he was the glue that held their blended family together. Blended family. What a joke. I was never part of that blend. Then it was his turn. My father stood, adjusted his tie, and smiled at the applause. Tonight is about more than just retiring, he said. It's about celebrating loyalty, family, the people who stuck around. I knew where this was going. It's about those who supported me, who didn't abandon me, who stood by my side through every storm. Then he paused, looked right at me, and those who walked away. Maybe they should keep walking. Laughter, some forced, some real, but I sat frozen. My hands gripped the edge of the table. It wasn't a speech. It was a slap. A public declaration that I didn't belong, that I was the traitor, that I was disposable. I tried to stand quietly, to leave without a scene, but then Daniel stood up, and everything changed. The room fell silent when I entered. No music. No clinking of glasses, no murmurs of conversation. Just silence, thick like fog. Dozens of eyes turned toward me. Some squinted, trying to recognize me. Others just stared blankly, as if I had crashed a stranger's wedding, but the one pair of eyes that mattered most? They were locked on me. My father's, and he didn't hide how he felt. He gave me that look, the same one he used to give me as a teenager when I dared to speak up. A look that blended disappointment, shame, and cold authority. The one that screamed, "You don't belong here. You're not wanted." It hit me like a punch to the chest, but I didn't flinch. I smiled, not because I felt welcome, but because I refused to let him see me break. Then, without a word to anyone, I made my way to an empty seat near the back corner of the room. I didn't make eye contact. I didn't greet anyone. I just sat down, legs crossed, heart pounding in my ears, and yet I still held on to hope. Maybe he'd come over. Maybe he'd give me a nod. Maybe he'd take the high road, but instead he turned back toward the head table, grinned at his guests, and put his arm around his new wife, the same woman he left my mother for, the woman who smiled like she had won a prize. She wore a floor-length emerald green dress and expensive jewelry, her hand never leaving my father's shoulder. Her presence made it all official, like our family's history had been rewritten with her. As the main character, I watched as servers delivered dishes of steak and lobster. I wasn't offered anything, of course. But I didn't come for food. I came because, deep down, I still wanted to believe that there was a place for me in his world. The microphone squealed for a moment before the speeches began. Trisha, his wife, stood first. She thanked everyone for coming and praised my dad's hard work. "Richard has always been a rock in our lives," she said with a proud smile. "He's not just retiring from law, he's stepping into a new era of family, unity, and legacy. Legacy. What legacy? The broken one he left behind?" She went on for several more minutes, listing names of people who had stood by them over the years. I noticed mine wasn't one of them. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. My father stood, tall and confident. He tapped his glass gently, and the room quieted again. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. This isn't just a retirement dinner, this is a celebration of loyalty, love, and the people who've shaped my life." I watched him carefully, waiting, hoping, bracing. It's easy to work hard when you're surrounded by real family. He continued. People who don't run when things get tough. People who don't turn their backs when times are uncertain. I swallowed hard. His tone was deliberate. His words were aimed like arrows. And I could already feel one lodged in my chest. People who stuck around, people who chose to stay. The guests smiled. Some nodded, raising their glasses. I didn't, because I could already see where this was headed. "You know," he added, glancing across the room but now locking eyes directly with me, "some people are just good at disappearing. And now, maybe they should leave." My world froze. Everything blurred around me. The voices, the faces, the flickering candles, all of it melted into the background. Did he really just say that? Did he just ask me, his daughter, to leave his celebration? I felt the heat rise in my face. My heart raced. But I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I looked over at Daniel, my husband. His jaw was tight, his hand resting protectively on my shoulder. But I didn't even need to look at him to know how.
I could feel his body tensing beside me.
I could hear the silent thunder of his frustration. He didn't say anything. Not yet. I glanced around the room, searching for signs of support. Some guests looked uncomfortable. A few lowered their eyes. One or two even exchanged awkward glances, but no one spoke up. Because when powerful men make cruel comments behind veiled speeches, people rarely challenge them. Especially when champagne is flowing and the stakes are social. I sat there frozen, trying not to cry, not because of embarrassment, but because of confirmation that this man, who once held my tiny hand on my first day of school, who used to tuck me in with stories about brave daughters and proud fathers, no longer saw me as part of his life. Maybe he hadn't for years, and now, He had said it out loud for everyone to hear. Before I could move, Daniel stood up.
Calm.
Tall, composed, he didn't shout. He didn't slam his glass.
He didn't throw a dramatic fit, he just stood there steady as a rock right beside me.
While my world felt like it was collapsing in slow motion, I grabbed his wrist instinctively. My voice cracked as I whispered, "Daniel, please sit down." He looked down at me, his expression soft and loving, but then turned his gaze back toward my father, and then, in a voice firm enough to command silence but calm enough to sting, deeper than any scream, he spoke. "With all due respect, sir," he began. She didn't disappear. There was a pause. You could hear a fork clink against a plate in the back of the room. You pushed her away. Silence. Every head at the table turned. The buzz of polite laughter and champagne chatter from moments earlier had vanished. Even the waitstaff froze. Mid-step. My father didn't respond. He just stared at Daniel, his jaw tightening. But Daniel didn't waver. "You cheated. You left. You rewrote the story so that you were the victim. But let's be honest for once. She didn't abandon you, you abandoned her," he said it plainly. No emotion. Just truth. I felt the tears rise in my throat, not because I was embarrassed, but because someone was finally saying it out loud. Daniel wasn't just defending me. He was setting the record straight. In a room full of people who knew pieces of the story but had always accepted the version my father sold them, someone finally shattered the illusion. Still, I tugged at Daniel's sleeve. "Please," I whispered, "don't do this." "Not here." He looked at me again, and this time I saw it, not anger, not pride, but pain. The kind you feel when someone you love has been hurt too. Many times he wasn't doing this for him. He was doing it for me. Turning back to my father, Daniel continued. "You talk about loyalty, you toast to it. You build speeches around it like it's some kind of trophy. But loyalty doesn't mean obeying without question. Loyalty doesn't mean keeping quiet while people are crushed under the weight of your choices." He took a breath. The room was still dead silent. Even Trisha had stopped sipping her wine. "Let's talk about loyalty," Daniel said, stepping slightly forward. "Let's talk about the daughter who stayed by her mother's side through chemo, through surgeries, through nights in the emergency room while you were off on vacation with someone else." Gasps, audible ones. I felt my stomach drop. He was going there. "Let's talk about the young woman who worked 2 jobs to pay for college after you cut her off because she refused to accept your new life." My father's knuckles were white as he gripped the edge of the table. His pride was cracking. And the audience, his curated room of admirers, was beginning to shift in their seats. "Let's talk about how she graduated without your help. How she never bad-mouthed you. Never posted some angry rant on social media. Never showed up to your office to embarrass you even though you embarrassed her over and over again." More heads were nodding now. I scanned the room. My aunt, my cousin, even my father's old law partner, they all looked stunned. Like they were seeing the real story for the first time. "If you want to toast loyalty," Daniel said, pointing gently toward me, "then raise a glass to her." My breath caught, because she's the only one in this room who had every reason to leave and chose to walk in tonight anyway. Chose to forgive. Chose to hope that maybe, just maybe, you'd look at her the way a father should look at his daughter. No one spoke. No one moved. My father's face was red, not from rage, but something else. Shame. Regret? I couldn't tell. Daniel returned to his seat, never once raising his voice. He sat down beside me and gently reached for my hand. It was trembling, but I didn't care anymore. I squeezed his hand back harder than I ever had before. Then came the moment I never saw coming. Someone clapped. Just one. A single, slow clap. From the far end of the table. It was my cousin. Then my aunt joined in. Then someone else. And before I knew it, half the room was clapping. Clapping for me. Not for the spectacle. Not for the drama. But for the truth, because everyone in that room deep down knew. They'd seen the cracks. Heard the whispers. Watched the photos vanish from Facebook. They just didn't know the full story until now. And now? They couldn't unhear. My father didn't say a word.
He simply stood up, shoved his chair back,
and walked out, his new wife trailing behind him like smoke after a fire. What was supposed to be his perfect night ended in a cold exit. but for me. It was the night I was finally seen. Finally heard. After the crowd settled, people came up to me, quietly, one by one. I had no idea. Your husband is amazing. You are always stronger than they gave you credit for. Some hugged me, some apologized. Some just nodded with new respect. I didn't need their validation. But it was nice to know I hadn't imagined it all. That night, as Daniel and I drove home in silence, I looked over and said, "You didn't have to do that." He smiled. "Yes, I did. Because sometimes, the loudest silence is the one we break. For the people we love." My father tried to laugh it off. It was the kind of laugh that wasn't really a laugh, just air pushed through his nose with a forced smirk, a defense mechanism, a cover-up, like he was trying to shake off the truth that had just been spoken in front of everyone he held power over. "I don't need lectures from some outsider," he said, waving a dismissive hand at Daniel. The word outsider echoed in the room like a slap. It was laced with arrogance and condescension. Like Daniel was just some temporary figure in my life. Like his voice didn't matter because he didn't carry the family name, but Daniel didn't blink. Didn't shrink. In fact, he took a calm step forward and said something that shifted the entire energy in the room. "You're right. I'm not your family." He paused. Everyone leaned in. "But I know what family looks like. And you wouldn't recognize it if it sat across from you at dinner." It was a direct hit. No shouting. No name-calling. Just truth served cold and precise. There was a ripple in the room. A collective sharp inhale. Like people were realizing for the first time that something sacred had been broken long before this night. That this wasn't just a retirement dinner, it was a reckoning. My stepmother, Trisha, stood up quickly. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor as she rose, clearly panicking. "Okay, that's enough," she said with a tight, artificial smile. "Let's not turn this into something it's not. This is Richard's night." But she was too late. Because then something happened that no one expected. My aunt clapped. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sarcastic. It was deliberate. Slow, firm, honest. Her eyes met mine as she did it, and then my cousin joined in. A few seconds later, a man in a gray suit near the dessert table clapped. Then a woman at the far end. And then half the room. It was like dominoes. One by one, they all stood up, not dramatically, but meaningfully, offering quiet applause, not for drama, not for entertainment, but for truth. They weren't applauding Daniel's words. They were applauding the courage to finally say what no one else had dared to. That my father wasn't the man they pretended to admire. That behind the polished suits, the speeches, the legacy, was a man who had cut off people like limbs that didn't fit the image he was trying to project. And apparently I wasn't the only one. As the clapping spread, my father's face turned red. Not the kind of red that comes from anger, but from shame. The type of embarrassment that burns deeper because it's earned. His hands curled into fists at his sides. His mouth twitched like he was searching for a comeback, a final word, a line, to win the crowd back. But none came, because in that moment his power was gone. He wasn't the proud retiree. He wasn't the respected patriarch. He was just a man who got caught in the truth, a truth too loud to ignore now. Without saying a word,
He jerked his chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the marble floor.
He stood up, eyes blazing, and stormed out of the dining hall. His wife scrambled to follow him, her heels clicking in panic. "Richard, wait," she called. But he didn't stop, didn't look back, didn't even try to reclaim the moment. And just like that, he was gone. The man who controlled every room he walked into had lost control of this one. I sat there frozen, watching the door slowly swing shut behind him. It took a moment for the silence to return. Everyone stood awkwardly. No one knew what to say. Some looked at me. Others looked at Daniel. But the air was different now. The illusion was broken. And then my aunt walked over, slowly, carefully, like approaching someone who just survived a storm. She bent down beside me and whispered, "I wish I had spoken up years ago. You were just a kid. You didn't deserve what he did." My throat tightened. She placed a hand gently on my shoulder. "I'm proud of you. And I'm proud of your husband." I nodded, unable to speak. More people came after her. Some shared their own stories. How my dad cut them off. How he manipulated family gatherings. How they watched from the sidelines. Unsure if they should speak, I wasn't alone. I never had been. A few minutes later, the restaurant staff awkwardly began clearing glasses and plates. The event was officially over, but for me, something new had just begun. I turned to Daniel, who was still holding my hand beneath the table. That wasn't supposed to happen, I whispered. He smiled faintly. Maybe not, he said. But maybe it had to happen. We stood up slowly and walked out of the room together, heads high. Shoulders back. No more shrinking. No more silence. Outside. The night air was cold, quiet, healing. We stood in the parking lot for a moment, neither of us speaking. Just breathing, processing. Then Daniel turned to me. I didn't mean to take the spotlight. I just couldn't sit there while he treated you like that. I shook my head. You didn't take anything. You gave me back something I thought I lost. What's that? My voice. He pulled me into a hug, and for the first time in years I felt safe, not just emotionally. Not just relationally, but spiritually. Like something that had been broken for so long had finally begun to heal. That room was never meant for me, but maybe walking into it was the closure I didn't know I needed, because it turns out the loudest applause doesn't always come from crowds. It comes from standing your ground, even if your voice shakes. Even if you stand alone. Or, in my case, with someone who refuses to let you face the storm alone. I didn't expect what happened next. The dinner was over. The storm had passed. The night that was supposed to humiliate me ended up exposing truths too long buried, but I didn't expect what came afterward. Not from the guests. Not from my family, and especially not from her. When I got home, exhausted and emotionally drained, I kicked off my shoes, sat on the edge of the bed, and just stared at the floor. My phone buzzed. It was a message from someone I hadn't heard from in weeks. My mom. We hadn't talked much since the divorce had scarred everything between us. Not because we didn't care, but because we both lived in our own quiet pain. Unsure how to bridge the silence, but that night she broke it. The message was short. I heard what happened. I'm proud of you. That was it, but it felt like a 100-pound weight lifted off my chest. My eyes welled with tears, not because I needed her approval, but because I realized how long I had been carrying the burden of trying to fix something that was never mine to fix. All I ever wanted was peace, and in 2 sentences, she gave it to me. For my father. He didn't reach out that night. Not the next day. Not even the next week. He stayed silent, just like he had done all those years after the divorce, after he remarried. After he cut me out of his life like trimming off a piece of paper that didn't fit in the frame anymore. And I told myself I was okay with that. I had said my goodbye long ago, hadn't I? But here's the truth. Even when we try to pretend we're done, some part of us still waits, even if we never say it out loud. Then 3 weeks later, I got a message. No greeting. No apology. Just 8 simple words. Maybe I was wrong. Can we talk? I stared at the screen for what felt like an hour. I didn't reply right away, because what do you say to the man who raised you and then tried to erase you? What do you say to a father who only spoke up after the world saw him clearly? But more than that, what do you say when a part of you still longs to hear those words? Daniel found me standing by the window, holding my phone like it was made of glass. You okay? He asked gently. I turned to him. Not sure what to say. He texted. What did he say? He said, maybe he was wrong. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Maybe. We both laughed, but it wasn't cruel. It was the laugh you let out when your heart doesn't know what to do, when you're not angry anymore, just tired. Do you want to talk to him? Daniel asked. I thought about it. The part of me that had been 12 years old again when he left. The part that had clapped silently at every graduation. Every award, every milestone, hoping maybe he'd show up. Even if just in spirit. And then the part of me that had finally stood tall at that retirement dinner, beside a man who didn't need to be my father to know what real love looked like. Yeah, I said softly, I think I do. We met at a quiet cafe on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. He looked older than I remembered, tired, smaller, somehow. The man who used to tower over my world now sat hunched over a coffee cup like he wasn't sure how to begin. Thanks for coming,
He said first. I nodded. I didn't think you would. he added. I wasn't sure either.
He looked out the window. I watched the video. Someone recorded it on their phone, you and Daniel. I felt a twinge of discomfort, but then he said something I didn't expect. He's right, you know. I didn't recognize what family looks like. I didn't reply. Not yet, because I wanted to hear him say it without being rescued by my words. I was angry for a long time. At your mom. At myself, and I took it out on you. He shook his head slowly. You were never the problem. But I treated you like you were. He looked up at me. I'm sorry. It wasn't a grand apology. It didn't undo the years of silence or the weight of absence. But it was real. And sometimes, healing doesn't come in perfect words. It comes in honest ones. We talked for nearly an hour, not about everything, not about the past in full detail, but about small things, real things. And somewhere in that conversation, I felt the sharp edge of the pain begin to soften. Healing isn't pretty. It's not some sweeping movie scene where everything is fixed with a hug and background music. It's messy, awkward, slow. It's watching someone fumble through an apology they should have given years ago. It's forgiving. Not because they deserve it, but because you do. It's realizing that holding on to anger is just another way of staying tied to pain. That day, I didn't leave the cafe with a healed relationship, but I did leave with a small crack in the wall that had stood between us for years, and maybe that's how healing starts, not with fireworks, but with a crack of light. That night, Daniel and I sat on the couch. We didn't talk much. We just watched some show neither of us cared about and ate dinner with the TV on like teenagers. And then he turned to me and said something I'll never forget. You don't earn family by blood. You earn it by love, by showing up, by doing right even when it's hard. I nodded. Because I finally understood what he meant. Family isn't about who shares your name. It's about who stands by your side, who defends your truth when you're too tired to speak. Who loves you not for what you bring to their legacy, but for who you are when the lights are off. And the world isn't watching. I may have been kicked out of that dinner. I may have sat alone at the back table while my father made toasts about real family. But I walked out with my head high, hand in hand with the man who stood when I couldn't. And somehow, that mattered more than any seat at any table, because I didn't just gain closure that night. I remembered who I was, and more importantly, I remembered I was never truly alone. If you've ever felt unseen or uninvited in your own family story, just remember, your worth isn't based on someone else's seat at the table. Sometimes walking away is how you win. Let me know in the comments, have you ever stood up for someone who couldn't stand for themselves?